Batu, Barada, Nikto.
You must remember those words.
Gordon's alive.
You know what the Turing test is?
I know Kung Fu.
Dead or alive, you are coming with me.
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to Stories Out of Time and Space. I'm your regular host, Scott Weatherly, and as always, I'm joined by Julian Darius. Julian, how are you doing? You okay?
I'm doing fine. I do have several people living inside me and observing what I'm doing, and they compel me to commit crimes. And that's the judges don't appreciate this, but
It is what it is. I think we're heading into the Exorcist episode rather than Black Mirror, but we are into episode 6 of season 4, and we're about to take a march off to the Black Museum. I was about to say Black Parade, then I was going to so much onto that. In the Black Museum, a woman enters the Black Museum where the proprietor tells his stories relating to the artifacts. So Julian, what were your first thoughts or your initial thoughts then on Black Museum?
I think this is a mixed bag, but I'm willing to go with it. It reminds me obviously of White Christmas in terms of presenting, 3 different stories within a framing sequence. It's rare. I mean, some of the stories work better than others. Obviously, they're all connected. They're actually connected better than White Christmas. But it strikes me that one of the most amazing things about this episode is that the host of the Black Museum, and of course I'm thinking of, 2000 AD, and it's a Black Museum, it's Judge Dredd's world, is that host is sort of a callback to sort of, the Crypt Keeper, and Elvira and stuff like that. And he's very arch. And
he's wonderful.
Yeah, he's great fun to watch, but it's one of these episodes that kind of doesn't, Black Mirror takes itself so dreadfully seriously, right? And that can be part of what's irritating about it, is its kind of sense of pretension, or its own cleverness. And this is an episode that sort of embraces that kind of arch Tales from the Crypt kind of feeling, and I really like that. It's very different from Black Mirror. What are your thoughts?
You said about hypocrisy in the previous episode. This is where my hypocrisy comes in, because I really like this episode, but it also suffers from the tropes of the consciousness being able to be flicked around like a bloody, out on a disc and all other stuff. Like I'm really beginning to hate that. I really am. And this thing of I've got real problems with this hologram being electrocuted at the end. It doesn't have a central nervous system. It doesn't feel pain. That's ridiculous. However, as you say, there's a sort of, we said it in this other thing we said previously about how things work. They come together and they sort of work. And because this is so arch, I mean, I feel you're right about talking about Tales from the Crypt. I was thinking about sort of like, for me, there's like these portmanteau horror films that were made by a company called Amicus in the sort of 60s and 70s. And it would often be like Christopher Lee or Peter Cushing would be some sort of like iffy character. There's one called The House of Dr. Terror, something like that. There's another great one called Asylum, which is possibly my favorite, where this guy goes to a job interview and he has to assess these 3 patients and they tell him their story and all this other stuff. Like, this feels like in that vein, where you've got sort of like, it's a sort of an anthology film within an anthology series, but like, that portmanteau sort of like 70s horror film vibe. And I was really digging that. And the fact that like, the guy's name is Douglas Hodge, who plays Rolo Haynes, is the fact that he's clearly like chewing the scenery throughout makes it so much more appealing. Like, I'm enjoying this. in a sort of, by the time I got to the end, I was kind of feeling guilty about enjoying it. Not guilty pleasure, but I was like, I'm enjoying this despite the fact it's got so many tropes that are winding me up and driving me up the wall. But it kind of works. And if anything, this highlights more than ever this thing of like, when things work, I'm willing to forgive them more than when they're just a trope in an episode and they don't work so much. So yeah.
Yeah, I think I may, speaking of hypocrisy, I may be more irritated by the the electrocution thing and the consciousness,
That really bothered me by the end. It was
it did
really
bother
bothering me. Yeah.
Yeah. But I will say that, for me, this illustrates that concept we've been talking about concision, and, I said it about White Christmas too, that I have real problems with White Christmas, but it bothers me less because it's concise. These are entertaining stories, but we get in and get out. And, ever since art for art's sake, we're supposed to judge works of art based on what they want to be.
Mm.
And this is an episode that's not taking itself as seriously. It's telling, 3 entertaining tales with a connected framing story. I'm more irritated by the ending here than anything else. I mean, I'm not charmed totally by this episode, but it is not without its charms, and it is entertaining.
It's one of those things though, where like the end, it all comes together, and it all ties up nicely. But also, I feel like the ending becomes so overly complex to pay off all the little, not overly complex, but it becomes overly self-satisfied by paying off all the things it does. And we'll get to the scene in the car where Letitia Wright is sort of sat there, and you've got all the little pieces from all the stories. I'm just like, all right,
we get it.
We get it. Yeah.
Right.
Like you've told us this 3 times now, that how clever you are. Like,
yes.
Stop it. But the first thing I want to talk about is, is there are 2 key things I want to sort of touch on first before we get onto the actual sort of begin to the mini stories. So the Black Museum, it's in the arse end of nowhere, but it when she goes in and she gets taken through, I love the fact that this, as you said, doesn't take itself seriously. It's very sort of Tales from the Crypt. It has something from every season.
Mm-hmm.
There's costumes in there. It touches on the White Bear. It touches on, I think, there's all kinds of. You have the tablet from Archangels in there. The bathtub from Crocodiles in there. It just, there's all this stuff. It's obviously mostly from this season, but it really wants to go back to a few others, to very recognizable things. It has the lollipop in the DNA machine, and all that kind of stuff. And I loved that. I thought that was great. But this is an episode that I've read up on, so it's a quick check because I was curious. So there is obviously there's a Black Mirror universe theory, that there are certain episodes that all existed in the same universe, and this episode tells you that. But more than that, one of the things I actually really liked, I thought was very sort of, I was well done for being clever, was it gives you a timeline. It doesn't say all the episodes happened at once. It clearly shares that, oh no, these have happened over years. Because he talks about consciousness stuff, and he says, oh, it's not like that cookie thing. That's that sort of was played out a little bit, and this other stuff. Like, it's a bit like that cookie technology. It wasn't quite that. So it's acknowledging that there was a progression of technology from some of the things that were happening in the past. And I thought that was kind of cool. I was kind of on board with that.
Yeah, I mean, to me, that fits in with the hokiness of this episode. Like,
I
can't take the concept of a Black Mirror universe seriously. They're very incommensurate stories. There's no way to square them in my mind. In part just because, for example, there's the one, the Men Against Fire, where it's like, all right, Europe is devastated, at least part of it.
Oh no, I don't think it's all
something
episodes.
we don't know, right?
Yeah.
I mean, so it's sort of like, even in like the Shut Up and Dance, where you think, I mean, that's been referenced, a lot, probably more than any other episode because it's so easy, but to reference. But it's like we talked about, what is the wider world like? that it's doing this, and it's hard to imagine. Right, and like one town over, they're doing the Waldo moment. No, that's not going on. But it's much more, especially it works in this episode because it's an Easter egg thing, right? This is an episode that doesn't take itself as seriously, and so it's easy to kind of enjoy that stuff.
Yeah,
but you're right. The museum is filled with these references, and it's fun, right? To spot the Easter egg.
It's wonderful, and actually because it feels so arch, it feels a lot more fun to try and identify all the bits and pieces. So, there was one that was interesting. There's a sign. There's a screen in the background, and it says about cloning without consent.
Mm.
And I was thinking like, which episode was that? Like, I don't remember a cloning episodes, but I might be wrong. And I was quite glad to see the little bee as well from the robotic bee was in there as well. So there's all those. I loved all that. I thought it was really good fun. I do find that kind of stuff fun. Anyway, so that was all good fun. But then you do get to. So let's get into the stories then. So we have the three different tales. So you've met Rolo Haynes as the proprietor, and he is going to tell Nish, this girl, sort of played by Letitia Wright, these different stories, and she is for different parts. And it's almost like he has this narrative, like he's leading her up to this main event. And the first thing he introduces to is this hairnet, this medical technology thing. There's a hairnet, and she tells the story of this doctor, Dr. Dawson, I think, something like that, who he is introduced this technology, and what he's able to do is by having this implant in and then putting this net on a neural net, very much like Strange Days, onto the patient. He is then able to feel the sensations of that patient, is able to diagnose what that patient has, and it's very successful. And he goes through all kinds of trauma trying to do it, helps a number of people. But there's also an upside, because if his partner is wearing it whilst they're having sex, he gets to experience the pleasure of both himself and the other person. But this culminates in an event when he's wearing this technology and he experiences death. Like that final bit of someone's neurons dying, this experience of like passing over. And after that, all of a sudden, it's this feeling of pain, this other thing, it sort of like seems to be filling a gap. And he becomes obsessed with taking pleasure from pain. And at first he tries to do it by sort of experiencing as many patients as possible, but that starts to get out of hand until he starts to self-mutilate, which was, I want to get onto, because that was so much like, I was like, dude, someone needs to give this guy the lament configuration. Like, this guy's going to be a Cenobite. But then he basically becomes a serial killer and attacks this guy, like puts the net on someone and drills into someone's brain whilst they're wearing this thing so he can feel the sensation. That's the first story. And I just want to out there, I love this. I thought this was fantastic. I was so into this story as a proper nasty little like sci-fi horror story. I thought this was brilliant.
Yeah, I liked it. I maybe was not as attached to it as you. And it was worth pointing out that it's based on a story Penn Jillette wrote in the 1980s called The Pain Addict. I guess I like it, and it works in that kind of like arch kind of anthology way. I still like it. And obviously, I like fucked up stories, right? So, I mean, the drilling homeless man's head, with his is great stuff. Having said that, it did remind me at its best moments of like, I like a lot of fucked up Japanese movies. I forget, there's one that I saw that I couldn't find a reference to it, but it's they give they're doing these experiments of sort of rewiring the brain's pain centers, where and one sort of rewires this woman to experience pain as pleasure, and she winds up going home and cooking and like accidentally cutting herself, and then proceeding to like cut off her fingers in close up, I've seen this kind of stuff. It's brilliant. I love this stuff. So and I love cuts he's taken out of himself, and the narrator Rolo is so arch and wonderful in describing this. Like he's clearly enjoying it, right? Like he's an irresponsible sort of sci-fi medical technician representative, but there's clearly a sadistic side to him
Yeah.
that he relishes. I guess my only reservation is sort of like, I like that he experiences a man dying. I don't know why that would make you a masochist. I mean, is the idea of like feeling somebody's neurons collapsing is like so orgasmic somehow. I mean, I like the fucked up Japanese, sort of, pleasure is pain stuff, going to an extreme, but I don't know why it has to go in that direction. So I just have a few minor little quibbles about that.
Well, what's interesting is I agree, because it does sort of gloss over it, but there's also a drop line when she sort of Nish asks what happened to him, and they were like, "Oh, they cut him up to find out what went wrong." Like when he died, when they caught him, and they've basically like, is he still alive? Yeah, but they basically, he's not coming out of any coma. Like he's been cut up to find out what went wrong, and you have this thing of him in the bed, and he's still in that pleasure center, and obviously, it even goes to the extent of he's like, all right, it pans out, and he's got a huge erection. He's like, all right, I joked about the boner, but like, which I thought was funny. But I like this idea
he say they cut up the rat to find out.
Yes. Yeah.
But I think the idea is that the doctor, somehow his brain, as he murdered the homeless guy, like his brain fizzled and he like
overloaded,
went into a kind of like coma kind of state, which is another kind of mild objection I have of like, well, you already experienced a man dying. I mean, I don't know why this would be too much.
It's a different way.
It's kind of a trope.
Yeah, but one died of poisoning that sort of gave him possibly like let's say this way, poisoning was like a heart stopping and the brain just sort of switching off. Having a Black and Decker sort of forced through your frontal lobe probably causes a slightly different sensation. So I don't know, I was accepted. It's one of those things, again, I'm going to say, mate, this is where that hypocrisy, where like, I agree with what you're saying.
Yeah.
But I'm like, no, I was well into this. Like the whole story just felt like it felt like a grimy, like, have you ever said there's the film like Maniac, from the 70s, or Basket Case, or one of those sort of like grimy 70s films like that? It had that sort of feel to it. I was like, yeah, no, I'm digging this. This is a good start to this kind of silly sort of like anthology episode. So I was all in.
Well, one of the things that speaks to is both of us like pulpy stuff.
Yeah.
And we also both like, artsy experimental stuff. But I think that Black Mirror has sort of bothered both of us, but especially you, in the way that it has tried to be, really smart and artsy in this really super sophisticated show that isn't as smart as it thinks it is.
Mm-hmm.
And so it's kind of charming to have this sort of pulpy episode where this is clearly like, closer in tone to the Reanimator than most Black Mirror episodes.
Yeah.
This story.
No, exactly. That's a really good example. Actually, like Reanimator, kind of sort of like Stuart Gordon level, sort of like kind of silliness and violence, and I'm all up for that. It is then countered in the next story. And the next story is, again, we sort of go to that sort of like, family drama. A couple meets, they end up having a one night stand, but a baby, and it forms into a family and a relationship. And unfortunately, though, on one particular event, the Carrie, the mother, when they're out one day, is hit by a van and put into almost like a permanent coma. And then, of course, our good friend Rolo turns up with a potential. I love how all the technology that they use is prototype. He's constantly like, we've got a prototype. It's like, it's not mass produced yet. Like, they're all been experimented on. This prototype where they can take Carrie's consciousness and insert it into Jack, the husband. And that way she can sort of exist in his head, and she can experience all of his feelings and sensations, and they can talk to each other in their head. And so again, we get this idea of a sentient sat in a chair, much like we did in White Christmas. There's this is the one where I started. This is where it starts to sort of fall apart a little bit, because for two reasons. As we've said before, like I'm kind of done with this sentience thing being inside, the ability to remove someone's consciousness. I said before we started, when we were talking just off air before we started all these episodes, that I had some Red Dwarf reference, quite a few Red Dwarf references with this episode in particular. Like Charlie Brooker clearly watched a lot of Red Dwarf, as far as I'm concerned. So there's an episode in Red Dwarf where Rimmer and Lister swap bodies. It's literally called body swap, and they cover off this thing of how they download people's personalities, how they make the hollow drives. And there's a joke in that, because they recognize how ridiculous it is when they download Rimmer's mind, it's onto this little disc. And they even say, like, all onto that, like, you know, they joke about how small it is, because it's even in the early 90s, it was a joke about how sort of like silly this technology is. And then they swap bodies and have this thing, right? So that's the first one that was sort of bothering me. So this idea of being able to plug someone in and instantly download their personality, their consciousness, when we don't even know what consciousness is. Like, we don't really understand what it is. Like, we understand this. We understand on a scientific level that there's this idea of synapses firing and the brain does this and does that. But we've never really scientifically proven this concept of personality or awareness or consciousness. Like, there's an element that we just don't know yet. So this thing of having two, and there's also this nonsense of we only use 40% of our brains is, you know, drives me mad. Yeah. So once we get into that, where I'm like, I'm still like, I'm on board. Fine, it's silly, it's pulpy. I've accepted the first bit. I'm accepting this bit for now. Let's keep going. However, I love my wife. I really do. I honestly do. But if they were like, your wife's going to be piggybacking in your brain constantly, I'd be like, no, thank you. Let's not do that.
I love my wife might be one of those phrases like, I don't mean to sound racist, but,
yeah.
you know, like, I love my wife. I really do.
But
I'm willing to pull the plug. You know?
Yeah. But this just sounded like a bad idea from the very beginning. And even like, you know, Alex and I've got, you know, we, like you said, again, when we talk about Hang the DJ, like, you know, we have a lot in common, but there's other things we're desperately different on. Like, you know, she doesn't listen to this podcast. Like, she's not interested in science fiction. There's stuff that she's interested in that I'm not interested in. And then we have the overlapping stuff. But if she was to be living in my head in the same way that Carrie then lives in Jack's, like, and she was like, okay, well, I really want you to go read this generational book because I want to do that. I'd be like, no, thank you. That's not something I want to do. Like, I'm not. Right. I want to sit and read the book I want to read, or watch this film, or watch that film, or do this, do that. Like, you know, it becomes more of a, I don't know. I can't even see how this would work, because there is that moment when you're like, and all I could think about from the moment they did this was like, well, of course he's going to meet somebody else,
right?
Like, it's painted all over the place. So I was sort of like, this is a bad idea from the get-go. Like, I know this is going to go wrong. There's no upside to this. It never feels like there's an upside to this. It's going to go wrong.
Well, I'm willing to go along with that in the sense that I sort of see this as like, it's like this is a future shock. You know, it's like, you know, it's get in, get out. It's a silly idea. You know, like a lot of those are, you know, you're like, right. You know, we've got this experimental technology. You're not supposed to poke too hard at it. You know, like there's no therapist who shows up and says, yeah, in this kind of universe, like, you do realize, you know, she's going to watch you masturbate to, you know, porn of other women. You know, like, here's your therapy. No, it's just an experimental thing. It's an idea we had. Well, let's put your wife's consciousness in your head. I mean, so, you know, let me back up and just address this whole, like, you know, downloaded consciousness thing again. I'm not against the concept. I think that, you know, let's imagine that you could simulate, you know, every synapse in the brain. You know, it is perfectly possible to imagine. In fact, I would say, you know, it is likely that we could simulate a human consciousness within a computer environment. Having said that, that technology is so far beyond our ability to begin to imagine right now that by the time we get that kind of thing, we're going to have way more than flying cars, right? We're going to have like biological engineering. We're going to have a lot of stuff that's unimaginable to us now. And so my objection is not to the technology per se. It's that it's like, right, it's 2016, and we can download a consciousness with this handheld device the size of a dime. That's really my objection. But then secondly, that downloaded consciousness is not alive. And so this is again, that is a computer representation of that consciousness. Unless you take somebody's physical brain, and even then, there are lots of biological inputs on our brain and our consciousness that aren't stored in the brain, right? It's not going to get the same inputs. I mean, it gets very complicated. So why does she have to die? Like they say, we're going to do this.
Does she?
We have to kill her. What?
So that's because that was the thing I kept going back to. Like I said, yeah, does she have to die? Like,
no.
Yeah. No.
Well, I mean, she does, according to Rollo. Now, maybe at least here we can kind of guess that he just wants to kill her, for whatever reason. But
the body was used for another prototype. I'm sure that body's kicking around somewhere.
Yeah, I mean, I like those ideas, but it'd be nice to gesture toward that so we know that, like, it's this old trope of, the consciousness is transferred and then the body magically has to die either.
Because it's not, because it's this thing of downloading. It's not downloading. It's a copy. It's a copy.
Exactly.
Because you're not downloading anything. Our synapses and firing, our brain is not a program, or it's not a bloody film that I can download onto a device. That's the bit that annoys me.
Yes.
Right.
Exactly.
Here's Red Dwarf reference number 2. Right.
Okay.
I'm Audible, so I'm currently listening to the first book that was written by Rob Grant and Doug Naylor. And it's read by Chris Barry, who is an absolute national treasure. And his ability to do voices, by the way, is phenomenal. Like, he's brilliant. But anyway, there's a part in that where they talk about being a hologram. So if you die on Red Dwarf or any of the Space Corps ships, they can sustain a hologram, right? So the two of the things it highlights, which we'll come to this, well, that bit will come later, but the ability to sustain a hologram. But it talks about the ability to sustain a consciousness from these things takes up so much power and so much computing power that they can only sustain one per ship. Right? And these ships are like 5 mile long, 3 mile wide. Like, these are huge, huge things, but it can only sustain one hologram because of the computing power comparable to the brain. Now, granted, this was written in 1993, I think. So there's a bit of difference in time and science. But they're trying to get across how complex the human mind is. But one thing is, when these people die, they have it where, I mean, it doesn't happen to Rimmer, but one of the previous holograms of Red Dwarf has to go to a meta-psychologist to sort of deal with not only to deal with their death, but to deal with the fact that they are not the person that they were before. And also that they are not real. So there's a whole thing of like this guy called George, I forget his name now, but he has to go through. He's like, look, it's not I think, therefore I am, because you're not thinking. The computer is doing thinking. So what it is I think I am thinking, therefore I possibly am. To me that works perfectly, where like it comes to the realization of like everything you're doing is an anticipation based on your personality and consciousness that was created, that the computer thinks you will do.
Mm-hmm. Right, exactly.
The Rimmer that we have in Red Dwarf is not the Rimmer that died, because they're different. And it's the same with this, where, like you said, they treat them like a sentient downloading of consciousness, and it's not. And it starts to wear on me after a little bit.
Yes. Well, and the point you're making is that Red Dwarf knows this, and Black Mirror, praise for its brilliance, does not.
Exactly.
And consistently does not. And in a really dumb way. So, when we talked about USS Callister, still one of my favorite episodes, we talked about how these people being abused in the simulation in Infinity are not actually people, right?
Mm-hmm.
These are, you're abusing a replica app, like, who cares? This is not a crime. So in the same way here, you have the same sort of trope, but clearly that episode wants you to think this is a crime, this is terrible. This episode has the same failing. It really thinks that is Carrie inside Jack's head.
Yes.
And this will be an even bigger problem in the third story. So yes, that is a stumbling block that is super annoying. But I have to say, I love the sort of image of Carrie sitting there in the chair, kind of with nothing to do, sort of looking out. It's better than, we've seen this before. Like, you remember the episode with the digitized copy of a person where there it's clear that Brooker knows it's a copy. Inside as the operant of the smart home.
Oh yeah, that was in White Christmas. Yeah.
Okay, so there, she is just in this like white environment, right, and pressing some buttons. Here it's this kind of like dim. Carrie's in this chair, and it's sort of this dim, mystical, almost kind of Superman 78 kind of space with this distorted view screen, which I quite love because I'm so sick of eyes being thought of as cameras. Like, no, they're actually really distorted and they're focused in the center, but have really low resolution, on the sides.
And also that your brain translates that and turns it into an image, not your eye. So yeah.
Yes, that's right. And so I found that a more satisfying and visual representation of her experience. And I do love this idea of like having compassion for this AI version of the wife, right? Or the wife's consciousness, if you believe the stupid, version of that. And saying, well, we don't want to delete it. Obviously, like the girlfriend's like, just delete her, right? But Jack can't bear doing that, so they put it inside this pet monkey who can only say two phrases.
Before you say pet, it's a toy monkey. They don't.
Yeah, I'm sorry.
Yeah. Because that's a very different story. Yes, this toy monkey that has controlled or rudimentary communication, doesn't it? Yeah. It says two things.
Well, yeah, and so I really dug. The monkey bit I really enjoyed. I really did like the putting her on pause. You have to buy these premises, for this story to make any sense. But I enjoyed the story.
Yeah, no, again, I'm going to sort of, let's say, like, because I think how much this episode kind of works, there's parts that I'm going to go, all right, I'm going to buy it for this. Because I think, again, going back to some of those other things where the relationship stuff doesn't work, it works better in this. Where I'm like, okay, I'm going to accept this for a number of reasons. That it's better told. The actors are better. What's his name? The guy playing Jack.
Aldous Hodge.
Aldous Hodge, yeah, I like him. He's, he sort of works for me, and sort of like, in him and his arguments with Carrie, sort of what Carrie as well, Alexandra Roach. I think that all their relationship kind of works. Like it's because I'm buying the stuff on screen. I'm like, I'm giving some of the technology a pass to an extent. Like it's still irritating me. But like I say, when he puts it on, it is kind of heartbreaking when he puts it on. Like it's instant as well. Like he puts it on pause and then unpauses it, and she's like, "Where'd you go?" And it's been like 8 weeks, but for her, it's been an instant, and stuff like that becomes kind of is kind of scary. And then it keeps whittling her down. Like, okay, well, we just activate her at the weekends, and we do this and we do that and stuff. All that kind of seemed inevitable. Like all this was from the moment he said this was going to happen. I was like, well, this is clear where this is going. Like it's not, this is a bad idea from the beginning. The only thing I was kind of disappointed with is that the monkey is like a floppy toy.
Yeah.
I was like, oh, we're going to get, like, when he says, I've got this, I was like, oh, we're going to get like a Chucky episode. Like this is going to be like an, like some creepy doll's going to be walking around the house now. That's amazing. And then it's not. It's just like a stuffed toy with the receptor in it that can say "Monkey loves you" or "Monkey needs a hug." So yeah, there is that sort of thing.
Well, the monkey thing is, you're right. It seems like so lowbrow, It seems like so not lowbrow, so lo-fi, right? Like, such a simple toy, in a world where you can transfer consciousness, right? But I kind of like that because it kind of, to me, it sort of implies that they don't give a shit, right? That like Rolo's like, yeah, we don't give a shit, right?
Yeah.
We just put this receptor in here, and I do love this sort of nightmarish, like basically we feel compelled to keep this person, quote unquote, this algorithm alive. At the same time, we really don't want to interact with it, and so like we're giving it expression, and yet it's just a happy and yes and no, happy, sad, monkey loves you, monkey needs a hug. That even the ability to consent and deny it has been reduced to this very limited experience, and that has a kind of like RoboCop-esque
Yes.
body horror sort of inability, coma-esque inability to express yourself,
Well,
that I love.
one of the moments is that the story doesn't kind of end. It sort of just peters off, and then you are left because they're looking at the monkey in a case, and he takes it out. And this, I ain't gonna lie, like this is one of those bits that's it's kind of harsh, but it works because, as you say, like I've accepted this is not a person, but they're telling you it's a consciousness. And then when he takes out, and the monkey says, "Monkey needs a hug,"
Yeah,
and you are like, Jesus Christ! It sort of dawns on you that not only has it gone through, like they gave it up, so they gave it up, so it was taken away from the family or whatever. Like Jack passed it back to Rolo at some point, saying, I assume there's a conversation where they've gone, you might as well delete this. She needs to be deleted. We can't do this anymore. It's unfair to her. We've had it, they might have even had a discussion where, and you don't see it, where Carrie consented to being deleted. And then Rolo's gone, nah, you'll be great in my museum. And she's just sat there in a case, and it's like there's this insanity of being caged in this thing. It's kind of effective because then obviously Nish is like, she's still in there. And he's like, yeah, well, now the laws have bloody changed because of cookies and all this other stuff that we've got now. And they've got to have all this level of expression and we can't delete them because they're considered a consciousness. So I'm kind of stuck with her. And all I'm thinking is, like, just put her on pause.
Yeah. I mean, well, of course, maybe that's illegal too. I don't know.
Yeah.
But I mean, and if this is just a copy, why is that illegal? I mean, okay. But I mean, I do like this idea that the laws have changed, and I'm with you that like this story ends a lot better than it starts, right?
Yeah.
Like this is a story that sort of starts with consciousness transfer and some sort of silly tropes, but takes you to a place that is really kind of horrific and really very entertaining. And so yeah, I mean, I can imagine the same things that you're suggesting of sort of there's more to the story of how it got passed to Rollo and how, and here again we're starting to see, because Rollo seems more evil in each story. So in the first one, he's helping a doctor, right? He's got a new technology, and the technology goes awry, and he doesn't seem too concerned with it, but he was still trying to help a doctor. And in the second one, he seems a lot more manipulative, a lot more outright sort of evil.
Yeah.
And then, at the end of that one, because of course these three stories are chronological in Rollo's life.
He lost his job. I love that. Yeah, he lost his job and had to go. I also say, before you go back to medieval, there's a great scene in this middle story where Jack and the new girlfriend, Emily, go back to, I think it's one of those. Anyway, goes back to Rollo, and he's like, "You've got her on pause now." And he's like, "Yeah." He's like, oh, "Okay, good. There is deletion." He doesn't want to say it in front of Carrie, but it's like you say, there's that little bit of, he is like a sleazy car salesman kind of look, isn't he? He's got that sort of that look. So I do like him. I just find he's a really fun character.
I think so too. I did kind of wonder about how we have both in the dating episode a couple episodes ago, and in this episode with the Peter Dawson doctor arc.
Mm.
This show has been willing to depict sexuality and go to places. I was surprised that there wasn't some of that with the monkey thing, with the monkey story. You know, like he gets a new girlfriend. Is he unpausing her? Is he pausing her while he's having sex with a new girlfriend? There's, there's one little bit there where he, where he flirts with her when he first meets the new girlfriend, and Carrie's kind of disgusted, and he says, I haven't masturbated. And she says, who's stopping you? But obviously he feels disgusted masturbating with her inside his head.
Watching over, yeah.
But I thought they were, one thing that's never really addressed and, or isn't fully addressed in all of these stories about consciousness or whatever is like, we see Peter Dawson, the doctor, having sex with his girlfriend and experiencing male and female orgasm. And it's done as kind of like a little joke. But isn't that a whole set of different sensations that you would be like, wow, it's really amazing being a woman, and or vice versa? And I'm always interested in that, and how, usually it's done like, oh, I can touch my own tits, like in this really crude way, rather than, oh, this is interesting, right? Like there are physical sensations that maybe aren't new to me, but are located in new places, that I associate with different sequences and parts of the body that feel different. And, in the same way, there's an opportunity for that with Carrie in the second story that is kind of dodged. And I almost thought, like, I was sure there was going to be an episode, a portion as the monkey is sitting there watching, because the monkey's no longer on pause, watching them have sex, and
an interesting
and Emily kind of looking over, going like, "Don't put her on pause."
Yeah. Well, an interesting thing would be, we know that drinking alcohol affects the brain. It affects the way that some synapses fire and information is received. An interesting thing would be, well, what happened if Jack and Emily, when they first got together, were really drunk, and he forgot to turn off Carrie, but because of the alcohol, he couldn't hear her because that part of his brain was doing something else or whatever. Like, there's ways of doing it which would be quite interesting.
Well, plus Carrie would be drunk, right?
Yes.
Would experience.
Maybe she'd be like, "Woo!"
Yeah. She'd be like, "Yeah, have sex with that girl. That's how that. What did I do last night?"
Yeah. So there is all that. It's kind of interesting that sort of anyway, but the last sort of story, let's get to the last story then. So it gets a little, this is what's interesting. It goes sort of like pulpy but dark, and then sort of comes to this sort of dark but kind of let's talk about it. Anyway, so the end one is Rollo's lost his job. So he then decides to do things where he's trying to do consciousness as a sort of proprietary license or an object, so as people to sort of die or whatever, they can have their conscience downloaded, and then they can be at first one point he wants them for like a Madame Tussauds. So what I like is he clearly, but what I like is this is when we know that Rollo's truly evil, is because he knows, or at least in the context of the show, like we've obviously dissed it, but he knows this isn't like a copy. This isn't, we consider it to be an algorithm. He doesn't see it as that, yet he's willing to treat them as like a dummy, a property. But anyway, celebrities aren't into it. It doesn't sort of go anywhere, so he decides to sort of do crime instead, this criminal, and he pursues a thing called Clayton, who was apparently a killer, killed some stewardesses and some other people. But there's always been doubt about his guilt. There was a documentary and all this other stuff, and so, but he's going to get the chair, and so he gets.
We should mention he's black, right? So this is also American justice, and this is how it disproportionately affects black people.
Yes,
and there have been a lot of cases, we should say, of people on death row being exonerated by DEA
in the last minute and all kinds of things. But he is not exonerated. He is executed. I have a slight issue with this, but we'll get into it. He's executed, taken to the electric chair, and during that, his consciousness is downloaded. And then as part of his black museum, Clayton, who Rollo is adamant was guilty, he uses his consciousness in an exhibit where you can flick a switch and you can re-electrocute him for up to 15 seconds. Like, he actually tested him to see what the tolerance was. And then guests come in and they can tolerate. And then if you pay a little bit more, you get a copy of that consciousness as it goes through the most painful moment of that execution, which again seems like utter nonsense to me. As where's the power source? Where's the sort of this all being computed from? That kind of thing. But eventually, sort of like it wears off, and sort of less people start coming, and it then just becomes this sort of sadistic thing of people coming in, paying extra money to just do it again and again. And you just see this
and white supremacists.
Yeah,
he says,
basically,
he's like,
yeah,
the public is diminished.
Yeah,
and those aren't enough to keep the lights on.
But what we find is that all this torture has basically just damaged Clayton, this consciousness in this hologram, and he's now just nothing. And then, so do we want to talk about let's do that until we get to the finale? I think it's worth talking about this story first. So thoughts?
Yeah, this is a problem. I mean, this is not. There are things here that are interesting, right? I mean, and again, I have to take this as a kind of like 2000 AD short. Like, there's stuff you haven't thought out, but it's kind of cynical and wacky, But here, the problem of consciousness is much more annoying. It's much more central to the story. It's not something that you can just kind of bracket and say, okay, I'll go along with that. So, because, I'm fine with the basic setup of, Clayton being killed and having a copy, and, and having an electric chair where you can pull the electric chair switch yourself. And, that is great stuff from a storytelling perspective. But why do you have 15 seconds? This is stupid, right? This is, you can reboot that consciousness. It's just on a computer. This is dumb from the beginning, right? Yeah. I mean, it's fine. It's a smart idea to have a simulated electric chair, right? But, why this 15 seconds thing if you can restart the program? This whole, like, making copies that are on a souvenir that are in constant pain is so sadistic and gratuitous. It leaves a bad taste in my mouth, but
which is supposed to, but
right. And it feels like a 2000 AD thing. Like, isn't this a nice ending of the Future Shock? But it doesn't make sense. And you mentioned the power source, but first of all, if he goes crazy after 15 seconds, that other copy would go crazy after 15 seconds. So what happened? Does that mean it dies? It's not conscious of being electrocuted, And if you can make copies of the consciousness, then it's not really the consciousness. It's not a moral issue to begin with. And you can reboot that consciousness so you don't need this 15-second thing. So, I mean, it wants to have it both ways, that it is the consciousness and this is an unethical thing, not just a bad taste in your mouth thing, but an unethical thing. Even those copies suffering, we're supposed to feel bad about. But it wants it both ways so you can duplicate that consciousness onto this device. So here's where that whole consciousness problem really gets stretched to a point where I can't support what the story's doing.
I agree.
Really bothers me.
First and foremost, when he is electrocuted, he's actually attached an electrical device to the person's head. So when they flip the switch and he comes back to collect it after, that memory download has been frazzled. So that's stupid. I hated that when they attach it and then they put the bag over his head. I was like, no, do the download first, right, then remove it, then do the electrocution. Like, why is this? This is ridiculous. the other thing is this thing about holograms, and that so I'm fine with holograms. We do them now. They're on performances, and they come on stage, but they're not moving around like this. So okay, I'm willing to accept. If I can accept the holodeck in Star Trek, I'm willing to accept this thing. I like the fact that he's black and white, like he's grey. That there is, which is exactly what Rimmer was supposed to be in Red Dwarf originally. But as you say, the thing with his consciousness being electrocuted and tortured again and again and again, and it making him, more docile and breaking him and all this other stuff. You go, okay, well, it's learning. All right, so it's something that's happening from his experiences, as you were sort of highlighting, which means it is a consciousness. But as you say, then they're making copies of it and holding a fragment of that consciousness in one of those things that it suffers in pain. And again, that's the thing where I'm going, it's just such a sort of, it's one of those things we say it's an idea, but it doesn't do anything because they're going to want it they need it because it's part of the ending. It's part of this, aren't we clever, cynical ending. And I've got there's a ending to this I sort of, I would much prefer. But anyway, the other thing is, he's a hologram, he's light. All right. So there's a consciousness there that's big, but the consciousness is not in that light body.
Right. That's right.
Right. The consciousness is not in that light body. Cool. So where is it? It's in a machine somewhere. Then there's been projected out. So where is this? So because he then talks about these the thing from the first story, the technology from the first story to feel the pain and stuff is being used to create this sensation of pain in this. So okay, so more than just a hologram. So you've got three pieces of technology here. You've got the hologram, which is able to move around this cell as controlled by this consciousness, which is being held somewhere in a server that I assume of some kind. So it's controlling this hologram. But then you've also integrated it with something that is going to act like a nervous system so that consciousness can feel pain. But
that's a lot of work.
That's a lot
in
of
order
things
to make people feel good about electrocuting the hologram.
How are you maintaining this? How are you powering it? How is it? It's all. This is where I'm just going like this. Just I know that this is supposed to be, as you say, this thing, but it's like it's a bridge too far. This bit where I'm going, but the story wants to be. We've brought all this technology together, aren't we? Clever. It's all culminated in this. And I'm going, yeah, but this is a shitty off-road museum in the arse end of nowhere. How is this being powered? How is it? This makes no sense. Like this is no longer you've jumped the shark in this episode, and I'm sort of out the door.
Yeah, I think the problems with the previous two stories, sort of culminate, in a story that takes it too far.
Yeah,
and those problems, then become so great that you can't kind of bracket them. You can't just kind of say like, well, that's a trope, and we move forward because, as you say. With a hologram, you're simulating the pain, that the hologram experiences in a computer that's also simulating the personality. But, I'm perplexed by like, why 15 seconds? You can
he
restart,
does a test.
Yeah,
I don't know.
You can restart that algorithm,
It doesn't want you to think about that, though, does it? That's the point. Like he does the tests because when he first gets it, he runs those tests from 5 to 20 seconds. And he says like 15 seconds was the sweet spot. And so, yeah, I don't know. It just the point is this has all been building up to two things. It's been building up to this display of technology, of how technology has been up. This is the Black Mirror thing, isn't it? Of how technology is manipulated for evil. But it also, you want to feel that Rolo has crossed the line. Like Rolo now is the villain in all these pieces. Because then you get the final reveal, which we'll get to, is that Nish, Letitia Wright, is one visitor. Is a visitor. Who's the visitor who's been sort of taken around the museum. At one point, she handed Rolo a bottle of water because he was feeling hot, and he's starting to feel worse and worse. And it's revealed that she has poisoned him, and that she is actually the daughter of Clayton, this guy that was this murderer that was convicted. And you find out that when he was killed. There was a campaign to try and save him, and all sort of stuff, and that the mother committed suicide, and that Nish is the only one that's left. And and
She
she's
gets her
come here.
revenge.
She's come here to get revenge, basically. But she's going to kill Rolo, take his personality, insert him into this
hologram
electrocution thing, and then electrocute him to take a sample and basically leave him in it, and then take a sample of this thing to take with her. And then as she sets it on fire, and as she leaves,
well, she gets when you say a sample, she gets the same sort of souvenir
yes,
of Rolo being electrocuted forever, right?
well, what she's doing is I should say this is where it gets. Let's be clear, actually, because I want to be clear. Because this is where it gets really, like, the levels in this get so fucking complicated. She hasn't created a hologram of Rolo. She has used the technology that we know of Carrie. So she's inserted Rolo into the part of the brain that Clayton wasn't using, which is obviously what happened to Jack. But you don't have a brain; you have a server.
Right,
So,
exactly.
So then you have Rolo sat behind the eyes of Clayton, ready to suffer because she's willing to sort of blow enough to kill this hologram of her dad. It's utter. This is the point where I was like,
"This really stupid.
This is really stupid." Like, just turn. There must be and for you to figure out how to do this, like this level of technology, I was just like, fine, this is ridiculous. Like, I'm off the train.
Yeah, well, that whole thing of using the technology from the second story with Carrie, and putting it inside the hologram on the hologram on
it doesn't work. It just doesn't work.
So dumb, and that's totally unnecessary. I mean, we get the same shot, but I know what it's doing. It's trying to tie them all together, but it's so dumb. I mean,
but they do it again. But this is the point where you didn't need that, because then you do it again because she leaves after setting it on fire, and she has the souvenir of the suffering, but it's of Dad's face. Let's be clear, which makes it weird.
Yes.
And then you find that behind her eyes is the personality, the consciousness of her mum. From when she
is it the
Dad's
face? I thought that
maybe
Rolo's is Rolo's face.
Okay, I'm not sure how that worked, because there was never a hologram of Rolo, because it was always a hologram of.
At this point, who gives a shit, right? I mean, like, it's so far off the tracks.
Yeah.
So right, then you find out as she's leaving, she has a conversation with her mother, who we just learned committed suicide in, after Clayton's death, and her consciousness is inside her head. I thought that was banned. Why is that? That felt so unnecessary.
Yeah.
And I mean, the one thing I will say is, I like the racial message here. That, first of all, the American justice system, which, loves its capital punishment, is racist and unfair. There's also a history of medical experimentation on African Americans in the United States. That's obviously copious. I mean, you think of Henrietta Lacks, and Tuskegee Airmen and all of this. We should acknowledge this, and that to the extent that this niche represents a kind of like revenge fantasy against a stereotypical, evil white dude, who doesn't give a shit about.
Then don't save the
lives.
Then don't save the mum's consciousness.
Yeah. Well, I think it's like, we teamed up to get revenge.
It doesn't work.
I'm not saying it works. It doesn't work. Nothing about this works. But I'm just saying, I get that it's trying to do that. I want to acknowledge that and say there's something worth doing there. The problem is it does, and I'm not trying to invalidate that if any listener is like, I responded to it on that level, right? That's totally fair. I get that. The problem is none of this works. It is so gratuitous that the mother's consciousness is in there. That feels like such aren't I clever? I'm tying it together. Yeah, but
But we've already we've spent, and this is the point. This is the problem I had with this bit. We've spent an entire story telling you how inconvenient and bad this is. That even Rolo has said, like, well, it always leads to disaster. And so the end of the film is the end of the episode is going, well, there's going to be an absolute mess of this later down the line. And I'm just like, leave it. You should have just had it as, we've been told this story. We've used the technology to create this hologram and do this bit. Nothing. The mother just committed suicide, and technology was not. I chose not to save her because of what my father went through.
Yeah. Well, that would be better. I mean,
Yeah.
you know, you're right that, you know, it's presented this as a problem. It's also told us it's illegal. I mean, yeah, it's very confused. You know, I'm also really bothered by this, you know, uh, what is it? This, you know, representative of Rolo suffering, right, in the souvenir. And I think that, you know, the episode sort of wants to have things both ways, right? It never really says, like, my dad is suffering, you know, 1,000 times over in these various souvenirs, 5,000, 10,000 times over in these various souvenirs. It never really says that's my dad, right? Because it's a copy, but we're supposed to think the one that's in the exhibit is the consciousness. I don't know. It's so stupid. But if it's not just that this is vicious, right? It's that if we get any satisfaction out of, you know, thinking that Rolo is suffering in the souvenir, right? If we get 1 ounce of satisfaction out of that comeuppance, out of that terror that has been, you know, that terrible justice, poetic justice that's been visited on Rolo, we must also say that there are 20,000 copies of her dad still suffering, and this is no justice at all because your dad is suffering times 20,000. You have done nothing. You've eliminated one copy, the original source copy, which wasn't being copied onto souvenirs anymore because nobody's visiting the museum. So you've eliminated 1 out of 20,000. Good luck. Congratulations on your victory. So it undermines that victory completely.
Yeah,
you know,
I agree.
In wanting to be clever.
It does, exactly. 100% I agree. And that's the problem with this ending. It's sort of, it's that too clever. And like you say, all because of the little factors they've put in before. And I was thinking the same, going, this is so stupid. This is going to make more trouble. It doesn't make any sense. It should have just been as simple. Forget all that souvenir stuff, right? Leave all that out because it doesn't. I know it's trying to be a bit vicious and nasty and a little bit mean, but it doesn't work. Makes no sense. Forget it all. This should have just been niche. Like, the mum died, and I chose not to save. I know I do this all the time. Apologies for doing this, but niche I chose not to save her because I've seen how bad the technology can be and how it can damage us. I let her pass on. I don't want her to know what I've become to do this. And then she takes the revenge, kills Rolo, does the bit with do the bit with the technology, have him suffer pull the dad out, put him in, he becomes a hologram. Even if it's like Rolo's consciousness with her dad's face, at least then it's his consciousness. You know, because the hologram could be, anyone's consciousness could be represented by a hologram. It doesn't have to then become Rolo. And then what I'd have had is just her walking out, and the final shot for me would have been her getting in the car. You see the place on fire, and then a final shot of that cage of all in flames and just a monkey about to be engulfed with flames, and all it says is, "Monkey loves you." and that's the end. Because all you've heard is monkey wants a hug, monkey wants a hug, and finally she's about to be released, and it's like, monkey loves you.
And watching Rolo's death, going, monkey loves you. Yeah, that would be really good. I was thinking that she would, because one thing, she has the monkey, you know, in the car with her. She takes it. So, you know, but I was wondering, like, have you asked this monkey, do you want to live? You know, like, if you ask the monkey, do you want to be taken or you want to perish in these flames? The monkey may well say, you know, monkey needs a hug. I don't want to go with you.
Yeah, exactly.
You want to die, right? Monkey loves you. You know, like, oh, okay. But I like your ending better with, you know, that would be the last shot, right? Yeah. Is the monkey watching Rolo die. You know,
that's satisfying to me.
On fire.
Yeah, that's satisfying to me. I know it's suitably grim.
It's bleak. Yeah.
Yeah, it's suitably bleak and grim. It fits in with the sort of the aesthetic of the show. But yeah, this is one of those episodes that it starts really strong, and I'm kind of on board with it. And the further on it goes, the more I'm sort of like, I'm off. Sorry, you've jumped the shark. And unfortunately, this is what I'm feeling. I'm done now. Okay, we have done. I had a bit check. This is the 19th episode of Black Mirror that we've done. Okay, and we have had 5 that have had some form of consciousness, you know, in transfer kind of thing, right?
Right.
It's
electronic.
done. Yeah, it's done. Don't touch it again. Don't care. Don't want this again. It stops. I'm going to tell you right now. Any episode that has that in it is an instant fail for me from this point on. We've got 2 seasons to go, but anything that does that going forward is an instant fail.
Yeah, we're gonna have some interesting conversations.
I have no idea what's coming. I've got no idea about the future episodes.
I don't either.
Yeah.
You know. Yeah, I mean, you know, yeah, we'll see. But I don't think Brooker can stay away from that trope.
No, I don't either.
But I think that, you know, this episode really illustrates, you know, some of the strengths and some of the weaknesses. I mean, of the show. I think that it is strong in its willingness to sort of do an anthology, that to sort of go to horror and, you know, silly, campy, you know, arch kind of horror. Every episode is a little different, and I like that it's experimental. You know, you could overstate the case for that, but I love that it's always trying new things. It's aware of, you know, some issues. You know, it wants to say stuff about race. It wants to, you know, say stuff about, you know, about relationships and sort of tell, you know, fun story. It doesn't really have anything too deep to say about those issues, but it's at least touching on them and telling entertaining stories. But its fatal flaws. One is it tries to be too clever by half. It thinks it is smarter than it really is and goes for those last clever little twists that it can't pull off, right? You know, that it does not recognize how damaging they are to the overall story. Yeah. And, you know, so yeah, I don't know. And it tries to tie everything together sometimes in ways that you really can't, right? You know, some of the best episodes are episodes that are very straightforward. But, you know, there is this urge to kind of like connect everything together. Obviously, audiences like that. That is a sort of, you know, thing you try to do generally as a writer, but it has to make sense. It has to work. And it just doesn't work here.
No, I think that, you know, this isn't the worst episode in this series in this season. I honestly think Hang the DJ is the worst episode of this series. I think, you know, there are silly things. I think like you said, the thing is, a lot of the episodes, when they work, they have moments of brilliance. They have moments and they work. Like the USS Callisto. Like, granted, there were whole bits of that where I was like, "This is stupid. I don't like it." But everything when it was doing the Trek stuff and everything when it was allowing itself to be funny worked really well. There were scenes that were legit funny, but it's not the idea isn't thought through. The problem I'm sort of having, well, no, to go to Archangel was the same. I thought Archangel was brilliant. I thought Archangel was, I don't know if it's my favorite episode of this series, but like, just so you said, it was masterfully done. It has this structure. It looks at the consequences. It's probably the most true to the intent of what Black Mirror was supposed to be, which is here's the long form idea of the consequences of these technologies, you know, in a story form. And I like that. And it worked for me. Like, you know, it doesn't have the huge emotional impact I think it wants at the end, but there was really good storytelling there. Was the third one? Crocodile. Weirdly, they say it was a mess, but it's that sort of like Nordic noir, sort of like Joe Nesbo kind of stuff where I'm like, yeah, I'm digging this. It looks great. I forget her name. Sorry, the actress who I actually really appreciate is really good. It's grim. But there are moments of logic in that where it just has to fall apart, where you're just like, all right, we'll go with that. But I'm on board with most of it. Hang the DJ for me is the more I think about it, the more I dislike that episode on so many levels. But I can't believe how much people like it.
We
But-
both loved Metalhead, though.
But Metalhead's fantastic. It's again that experimental episode. It does something straightforward, linear, but it
Mhm.
does stuff. It's mean and it's got these moments. Wonderful. And I think it all culminates in this episode where, like you say, when it leans into doing something that's can be a bit odd, like it does this pulpy horror, sci-fi horror thing. I'm all in. Great. I think it's twisted and weird and it's sort of dark and gross. And they've got like Rolo Haynes as this sort of like, arch narrator of the whole thing. It's a great character. But the more it tries to relay this story, we're going to have the relationship one, we're going to have consciousness, the more it layers up itself. It's like a cake, that you could do a really solid cake. And it might not be the most amazing, it might have slightly wonky edges or whatever, but like you go, that's a really good cake. It's a solid cake. Tastes amazing. And I'm all happy for that. But the more you keep adding to it, you're like, oh yeah, but now I've done icing around the edge and I've done this, I've done that. And you go, yeah, still tastes all right, but now it looks crap. Or like you've now put extra flavors on it. And I'm like, yeah, well, I'm out now. I don't want that. It's just sort of, it
Those
keeps
flavors don't work together. They
Exactly.
don't make sense together as
Yeah,
a whole, right?
That's it.
You think they do, but yeah. Well, I mean, I was thinking you were going back through the episodes, and I thought, going into, talking about Black Museum, that I would point out that I think this is the best season out of all four. And I'm quite taken with the season as a whole. I think, USS Callister, I like more than you. I agree with all of your, logical points about the failing of the show. But it works on such a high level. And just, walking through, I'm less bothered by that stuff in Hang the DJ. I think it's, you're right. I'm bothered by it. It kind of feels like a lot of nothing when I'm done with the episode, but I'm not irritated by it. I think, you're entirely in your rights to be irritated by it, and you're irritated by real things. But, let's say that is the weakest episode of the season. This is still a really strong season. So it's interesting to me that, like, on the one hand, I feel like this is a really strong season. It's still it's season 4. It's still firing at, a very high level. This probably has the highest average score for me of any of the 4 seasons. Almost certainly. And I did the numbers for myself. So I can tell you that I on the other hand, there are these tropes and these problems that are being repeated that get more and more frustrating for us as we go on. And, and one of them is, as you say, the consciousness being downloaded, right? Just the having things both ways, like, better than this, but you don't seem to care for the purposes of this story. And some of these sort of like focusing on the story that you want to tell, and then ignoring all of the consequences of the technology or how the wider world could exist to have this be the case. That's fine here and there, but it becomes kind of irritating as time goes on. So, it's interesting that we're like at these great heights. We're still loving, a lot of these episodes, but we're also kind of finding like it's grating on us in these other ways.
Yeah, no, I agree. I think I've just been looking at my scores because I've been putting them into IMDb, so I've been just checking. On average, I do think this is possibly the highest rated season. I think the problem is, I think one of the things is because when it is good, and I say it leans into those things, it's really good. Like there's been scenes and sequences and ideas that I've gone, oh, that's brilliant. I'm all in on that. That's fantastic. I'm really digging it. And I think the problem is, like, I'm then disappointed because all in all, I'm not looking for a masterpiece episode, but like, I think I was expecting something. Maybe it's my expectations. Like, this was so hyped as being this thing. I was like, oh yeah, it's going to be this thing. Each episode's going to be like a pinpoint satire of this thing. It's going to be sort of really interesting and I'm just kind of perplexed by the averageness of some of it as well, but also just sort of like just some of the really odd like storytelling choices. where you just go, huh? Not even like that's not the way I would have gone. It's sort of like I don't understand why you've gone that way in any way at all. Like it makes you've missed this obvious things, or one episode is incredibly experimental and poetic, like Metalhead, and another episode is incredibly straightforward, but you've missed like key, script writing 101 kind of things that would have just solved a whole bunch of problems, and it just leaves me scratching my head at times. One of the things I would say is this interesting is I've recently binged the BBC Sherlock episodes, the films. They're all sort of 89, 88 minutes. So I've gone through those, and I'm not saying this is comparable in that instance, but in this sense of like that kind of thing where you go, right, some of those episodes don't work, or they work less. But again, on high average, I think that show was fantastic. I really enjoy it. Great cast, great ideas, and sort of stuff. But there's moments as you get towards the end when you do start to notice tropes where you go, okay, they're leaning into the comedy of it now, or they're trying to make this character this or whatever, and it starts to sort of become a little bit grating. But I was after I watched it, I took a step back and I was like, but would I go back and watch, instead of watching it all, would I just go back and watch an individual episode? Could I just pop in and watch an individual episode? And I was like, yeah, there are episodes I would take out and go, do you know what? That's really good. From start to finish, that's brilliant TV. Like it's really well done. Like, there's so much there I can take. And I was thinking about the same with and we'll get, when we get to the very end, I think I'll do like a top 5 or something. But are there episodes of Black Mirror that I will go, I'm definitely going to go back and watch that again? Like that episode stands out as like, not the whole show, but that episode is something I will go back and watch. And at the moment, I have to say there's probably 2 at most that I think I'm going to go back and I will go back and I'll watch that because it's good entertainment.
Well, this is the odd thing about Black Mirror is, like I never want to go back and watch it, Like, I mean, I've seen, we're past where I've gotten to in past viewings. But, I think about it often enough. I appreciate it. I think highly of it. But I rarely want to go back and watch it. But I will say this, like, my ratings are still really high overall. I think they're probably higher than the Twilight Zone on an episode by episode basis. Now, of course, it's being produced over time with a much bigger budget and has less excuse. But, when I think of like the worst episdes, yeah, I mean, okay, Twilight Zone has a lot more episodes. It's easier to find something produced on a weekly basis that, is crap. But, I mean, the worst episodes of Black Mirror are kind of like, yeah, meh, like there's stuff that really irritates me, but there's also some ideas that are really fascinating in there. It's hard for me to just hate that episode. Any episode so far. They're irritating episodes, but there's still a version of them that's good. I still remember them, So I don't know. And like you said, the good stuff is really good. So I feel like Black Mirror is still firing on this high level overall, but it's exactly like this, to sort of wrap up Black Museum. It's exactly like what we're objecting to here, where it has stupid errors, and I get that it's one guy's show. And when you get like a short story collection, as you said earlier, you're going to get the idiosyncrasies of a single writer, right? And this feels like that. But what's so frustrating is like, right, this is so stupid in key, like this is a smart show that does certain things that are so stupid in key ways that are so stupid in ways that it has done before and failed to do before and shown that it knows are stupid, that it gets right in other episodes. So it's sort of like, I know you know better than this. You've made this exact same mistake before. It has hurt past episodes. Why are you leaning into your error, yet again, instead of learning from it, And so it's that kind of like repetition of a certain mentality. In a weird way, like I feel like we're kind of like watching iterations of Charlie Brooker's digitized consciousness, go through one iteration after another, and they're fascinating, but they grate on you after a while because you know it so well, and you know the problems it's going to run into, and can almost predict them. And they're still brilliant episodes, but and even the ones we object to are still good episodes, or they're perfectly fine, but it is oddly irritating in this kind of way, if that makes sense.
Yeah, no, it is. This is the thing. I like the thing is, you said, but I'm going to wrap up on this. The idiosyncrasies of this. You sort of accept, like you say, if you're going to read like a Stephen King short collection, or a Arthur C. Clarke, or sort of Philip K. Dick, or something like a short story collection, you know what you're getting into. You go, okay, well, they're going to be about this, and there's certain things I do like, and certain things I don't like. Of like, they're very good at writing this, but the endings usually suck, or they don't get the characters are usually shallow, but I like the ideas.
Mm-hmm.
Things like that. You can sort of do that in books, and you get used to it. So I know what you're saying, but there's something about this that seems to be sort of I get those idiosyncrasies, and I'm seeing them. But one of the things that's interesting is, like, if you take sort of like some of those short story collections from authors, if you go, this is your first collection, this is your later collection, you will see a progress in their development, where they've gone, do you know what, I really can't do that kind of story. I'm not good at, or I'm going to do better at it. I'm going to do several drafts of this, or I'll leave it out, or I'm going to try and do something different, or whatever. Fine. But with Charlie Brooker, like, it just seems to be the same, like, thing again and again and again, where I'm like, cool, he's got to a point where these are better, but I'm going to say that you said this season's better, is probably the best. I don't think it's down to him. I'm looking at like the production values, the costuming and the sets and the acting and all this other stuff.
Mm-hmm.
If anything, in some cases, I think episodes are good despite the story and dialogue.
USS Callister is a perfect example. I mean, we demolished that episode intellectually, and yet I'm still pretty charmed by it from beginning to end.
Yeah. So I think there is something there. I'll be interested when I get to the end of all this. I'll be interested to see how it all farms up. I'm not going to go. I was just looking at awards that the show has received, and I was looking at Emmys, and I'm not going to note that Hang the DJ was nominated for Best Single Drama.
What?
The Emmys had loads of. The Emmys are just pointless. The Emmys are worthless as far as I'm now concerned. They've lost all value.
This is why I don't like looking at the wider world and looking at other critics. So often I think, what is wrong? I mean, look, it's not what is wrong with me. I mean, I feel like an alien, probably because I came from Alpha Centauri, but also that I just feel, people are dumb, and even the intelligentsia and people who and outlets I mostly respect gets stuff so wrong. And I like that episode better than you, but it is not one of the stronger episodes.
No,
it's just not.
No, compared to some of the other episodes in this, compared Best Single Drama, compared to Archangel, which I think is again like masterfully done. That's ridiculous. Anyway, we shall leave it there, or I'll be moaning all night. And we'll leave it there. But anyway,
plus we have to leave something for the Black Mirror rap party at the end.
Which would just be me crying into the sort of the mic.
Well, that's what I'm worried about. Is you're just going to get angrier and angrier. You're going to be like, I really kind of like this episode, but you're just going to be like, fucking Charlie Brooker. I told him no more consciousness episodes. Damn it.
That's my thing. Like, I am convinced. Like, seriously, like, I'll if I get to one, I'll take it on its merits. But if there's one more, it shows to me he has no new ideas. Like, you've done it. Black Museum is your culmination of all those ideas around consciousness. Move on.
Well,
Black
or
Museum,
do it
so,
smarter, right?
Yeah.
Like, learn from your mistakes. I mean, I do think look at this episode. I mean, look at the season. He's experimenting. He's doing, Metalhead is a perfect example. I mean, he's willing to experiment. The show's still experimenting. I think that's great. It is growing. But there are certain things like fix your tropes. If you use that trope again, don't use it in the same dumb way you did last time. You know, like learn from your mistakes.
Yeah. Anyway, ladies and gentlemen, before I do talk carry on, we shall leave it there. So if you do or don't agree with us, we'd like to know. Come and reach out to us at PodTimeSpace on X, and we're on other platforms as 20th Century Geek.
I think the DJ was wonderful. You guys hate art.
Yeah. Fine.
That's okay.
Fine.
No, we just hate love.
Yes. We're both bitter and cynical old men. Otherwise, if you go and leave us a review. Maybe that's not the best way to go with this right now, but
No.
Go leave us
The
a review.
reviews should all be 5 stars. They all see the truth.
We're oracles. That's what we're doing. Breaking through breaking through the mainstream media. Or if you really like what we're doing, go check out our Patreon. We've got loads of stuff there of other things on there. Trek into the Twilight Zone, bonus material from additional shows on the main feed when we've done films. A lot of other stuff. Go check it out. Links down below. Other than that, we are jumping into Bandersnatch next.
Mm-hmm.
So the feature length episode that's got choose your own adventure elements, which I've not watched. I'm kind of excited for this.
Interactive. Choose your own adventure is a trademarked idea. So
yeah,
it's just an interactive story.
It's going to be good. I'm looking forward to it. See what happens. See how it goes. Hopefully, I'll come back excited for it. See what they've done. Otherwise, though, for now, Julian, thank you very much. It's been a good rant. I've got it off my chest. I've got it off my chest. I feel better. Anyway, ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much, and we'll see you on the next episode.